A lot of people never open their own firm, and really the business aspect isn't ultimately important to them. But to me, it ended up being very important. So,
Episode 92.
This is The Business of Architecture. Helping architects conquer the world. And here's your host, Enoch Sears.
Hello and welcome back, Architect Nation. I am your host, Enoch Sears, and this is the show where we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about strategies, tips, and secrets for running a profitable, successful, and more importantly, an impactful architecture practice. Generous support for today's show is provided by BQE Software, the makers of ArchiOffice. ArchiOffice is the office and project management software built specifically for architects. ArchiOffice is, and actually it's more affordable than you think. I was just given notice this past year that they now offer a low monthly rate that won't break the bank, especially for small practitioners. And in addition to that, for a limited time only, ArchiOffice is offering up to 2 seats of the software absolutely free for a full year to startup firms, which is pretty cool. So you can go check that out at archioffice.com. Today's guest is architect Peter Twohy. Peter's been an acquaintance and a friend of mine for a while. He's the owner and principal of Twhoy Architects based out of Baltimore, Maryland. This coming April 1st will mark 10 years in business as a sole practitioner, right there on April Fool's Day. In today's episode, you'll listen in as Peter Twohy shares the lessons he's learned from over 10 years of being a sole practicing architect. You'll discover how to start an architecture firm right away, even if you have no money and no current clients. And if you already own a firm, you'll be interested to discover how you can profit from the projects you don't take and slash your operating expenses by 25% or more using the simple business arrangement that Peter reveals in this interview. Now, but before I jump in today's episode, I want to remind you about the special product I'll be revealing soon called the 150015 Project. So it's a goal to radically improve the businesses and lives of 150 architects in 2015 to really make the mission of business of architecture here more impactful. And I'm keeping the exact details under wraps for now, but I guarantee you've never seen anything like it. If you want to be one of these 150 architects or designers, head on over to businessofarchitecture.com/150 to get on the early notification list. I'll send the details of the program to you first. Okay, so with that teaser out of the way, I want to welcome our guest today, architect Peter Twohy from Baltimore, Maryland. Peter, welcome to the show.
hi, Nick. How are you?
I'm excellent out here in California. We've gotten a little bit of rain, but unfortunately not enough to break the dry spell we've had out here.
Okay. So I'd just like to start by saying thank you. So I've listened to almost every one of your shows now. I've gone back and listened to the ones I jog like probably 3 or 4 times a week. And so put the podcast in and off I go. And it's been just great, So, going back to, what was that guy, Gregory Lavarda?
Yeah, Greg Lavarda. Mm-hmm.
Yep, so did that one, and obviously listened to Tom Main, which, you've had some phenomenal guests on. And so what I like most about your show is I think it makes me, just expands what I think of as possible for architects, and so I just appreciate it. So thank you.
I love it. Thank you, Peter, really for that sincere feedback. And I know I have my notes up here for today's show, and I can tell you that our guests are in for a great treat, especially those of you who are sole practitioners, because Peter's just going to dive into, the lessons he's learned from almost 10 complete years as sole practicing architect. Peter, you have beautiful work, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, I think, in our next episode. But thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it, and I look forward to jumping into the meat of today's show.
Go ahead.
So tell me, Peter, just let us know a little bit about you, about your practice, but let's start out with your origin story. Let's start about, take us back and tell us how you got started so we can get an idea of, you have a kind of a different story and an interesting model that other people can potentially use.
Right. So first, I went to college, Notre Dame, graduated, I guess, 1988, and then spent a couple years in Cincinnati, and we moved, my wife and I, to Germany for 3 years. So I learned German, and I got a job in a German firm, became designer there for, again, like 3 years, and then came back to America, worked in a firm here in Baltimore for about 10 years, and was kind of getting restless, and I got a letter, actually, not an email, a letter, that was addressed to all architects, or maybe not all, and it was an offer. You could open up your new office under our office, in our office space, and come talk to us about it. And I almost threw that letter out, because I didn't understand it. It seemed odd. But it is odd. But I didn't. Instead, I called, and then I was interviewed for this position. They interviewed the guy's name is Bruce Finkelstein. His firm is HBF Plus Architects, and at the time he had a partner, and her name is Kitty Daly, and so they interviewed me, and so I was like the rough equivalent of like maybe Woody Harrelson coming into Cheers, so the young architect and had a little bit too much energy, but maybe not quite enough smarts yet, and so, but there I was, opened up my own office, and the deal is that because again, remember 10 years ago, it was right before the recession started, so he was flush with work, and so people would call him and say, love to work with you, and when can we get started? And he'd say, well, maybe 4 months. And they said, well, wait a minute, 4 months. And so what my job really was to shorten his backlog, and so I paid him a certain percentage of the money that I made. That was our deal. And so for that, not what I billed, but what I actually came in. And so for that, he was my mentor, still is. I'm having lunch with him next week. And I lean on him for everything, so he's just been, for me, the perfect mentor. So, but I think it's a real, something that other people could actually do. So for me, right now I have a little bit too much work, and so I have options. One is I could hire an employee, I could get contract, draftsman or that kind of thing. I have options, but one of the options I have is to do the same thing that Bruce did for me. Become that mentor and help someone in the next generation. So probably roughly somewhere between 30 and 40 years old, maybe something like that. They'd have some experience and all that. So, but that interview was a very odd interview because I thought I was interviewing them, but the reality was they were interviewing me. Right, and it was very clear. They were looking for the certain type of person who could really do the work, didn't need a lot of guidance, but was going to need some. But the advantages were huge. So the first advantage was I went in and took their contracts and just erased HBF Plus and put Twhoy Architects on it. So I didn't have to figure that part out. Kitty was the person who did all the books. So again, I didn't have to figure that part out. So I went almost like instead of jumping into the fire or into the swimming pool, I just was wading into the shallow end because there was so much. I mean, I couldn't fail. From a business perspective, that was not going to be possible.
Yeah.
So it was and think about that though, like a young architect that can't from a business. But now I could have failed from an architectural standpoint. That would have been possible, but not from a business perspective. And I think the opposite's true of almost every architect that hangs out the shingle. That they could fail from a business perspective, but probably not from an architectural perspective. So it was great.
That's a great. I love the win-win aspect of that setup. So that wasn't an employment relationship. It was not employment.
And so my company was my company. I was in their office space. So and I'm obviously writing a check to them every month. So I'm making their business much more profitable. They're incurring no liability for whatever it is that I do. And the only part that was odd was when a person called them, but ended up getting me. And so and that worked fine. Again, but that's not going to work for everybody. Your personality has to be able to adapt to that. But it did. We never really had a problem with that. I thought it was going to be a problem, but it never really was.
And I would imagine that today with more use of mobile phones, voice over IP computers, that it'd be pretty easy to get two separate numbers. Are you saying you had the same number in the office as Bruce?
Yeah, so we did, and so, but for the first year or two, people called HBF Plus, and then they would decide whether they wanted the project, and if they did, fine. And if they didn't, they would say, well, we have this young up-and-comer, why don't you talk to him? And, it was my responsibility at that point to get the job. And most of the time that happened. So but again, it was just this, I knew I could do the architecture. At that point in time, I was about 40. and I was, a good enough architect. That was clear in my mind, at least. But I also knew that I was not a good enough businessman. We had business courses in college, and I had no idea at the time how important they were, and therefore didn't pay much attention, or it didn't sink in. I don't know, but it didn't. They didn't have a big impact on me, and that's a shame, really. But it's the reality.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's just so much to learn in architecture school. I almost don't know how you could successfully do both, really learn the business and then also learn how to be a great designer and architect. It just seems almost impossible.
Yeah, and it's maybe it's a left brain, right brain type of thing,
There's that. Yep.
And there's when you sort of get in your mind that you're going to become an architect, and then there's all this, you have to learn about Le Corbusier, you have to learn about Mies, you have to learn about Frank Lloyd Wright, you have to learn about all these famous architects and how they do what it is they do, and the business just seems like just a distant, like a problem that you may never have, which is true in some ways. A lot of people never open their own firm, and really the business aspect isn't ultimately important to them, but to me it ended up being very important. So,
well, it's the, as I like to say, it's the oil that makes everything run. If you're not generating that profit. Now, you mentioned, let's go back. So that's a very interesting model, Peter, that other people could use. It sounds like Bruce sent out maybe a mass letter,
right,
to certain individuals.
I think they were AIA members, I think is what he did, and I bet he sent out about 100. How he figured out which 100, like he didn't send obviously a letter out to the owner of a firm, but he sent the letters out to people who had, been an architect for 10 years. I don't know what he did, but he found this, and he said they interviewed about 12 people and selected me. So that was but I like the interview was very cordial, very comfortable right from the start, and so, but it was again. I really thought that I was the one who was going to be doing the interviewing, and it was the exact opposite. It was very funny when I realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm being interviewed, not the other way around. So anyway.
Interesting. Well, did that help you out at least a little bit in terms of your confidence going in? Because obviously, I think when you're the one interviewing, you're going to come in there more confident as opposed to feeling like you're on trial.
And that probably did help the first, and then when it flipped, which was I realized fairly early. My initial impression had already been made and all that kind of stuff. So that probably worked out fine. And I realized as soon as I knew I was being interviewed that I really had nothing to lose. So I had a job. It was a good job. I enjoyed my job. And so, at that time I was a designer, and I designed very, very high-end residential and religious buildings, so mostly synagogues. And which was great for me because if there's any building project that's even more important than someone's house, it might be their place of worship. But I don't think there's a second one. So I like that. I like that my clients think that their job is really important to them. And so that's important to me. So if they're not interested in their own project, then I'm unlikely to be interested in their project. So that's just one of the ways that I differentiate clients now. If they're again, like they need this for some reasons, and I'm more interested in their project already. But so I had that job. It was a good job. I was doing work I loved, but at the time I was their designer. So I would do the design, and then I would move down the line to somebody else for the construction drawings, and I would throw in as much as I could detail-wise, so that it wouldn't get ruined in the construction drawing process. And there were a bunch of different people there that worked there that I sort of, moved to. And I would just look over their shoulders and, I was nervous. Wait a minute, you can't do that, like that. And so it was, but for me, so one of the main reasons I wanted to open my own firm was a little more freedom from design, but also to grow up, So for me, I thought I was really only half of an architect, a designer. I didn't really get into the construction drawings, which people tell me, contractors tell me that they like my drawings because there's enough information, not too much, and it's and they can find it and all that kind of stuff. So that was again that's been a growing experience for me. So I've enjoyed that.
Now, Bruce, is he a fairly good marketer? It sounds like he understood even with his interview process or his process of finding you. If we look at that from a marketing exercise, we can apply that to anything. So a lot of times as architects, we don't think about when we're hiring someone or when we're doing any business relationship. We're going to follow the pattern of marketing.
Mm-hmm. And I would say he's a very interesting thinker. So his a lot of people tell that I'm an interesting thinker because they don't think like architects. So I would think I'm kind of somewhat normal in the architecture range, right? Bruce really isn't. He's a very interesting thinker. So I'm always probing him for different types of, almost on any topic. So because I never quite know how he's going to approach any particular topic, but on the specific topic of marketing, he thinks about that a lot. And again, he's about 10 years older than I am, plus or minus. So the computer, he's probably better at that than I was, which is a little bit unusual for people. Mostly, people 10 years younger than I am excel at that. The 10 years older people usually don't. And sometimes spectacularly so, like I can do email and that's about it, kind of thing. And he's the exact opposite of that. So he realized the potential and the power. And so, yeah, very interesting guy.
Interesting. Well, I know a lot of people that I talk to, Peter, they think that, I guess they expect remarkable results. So I think it's interesting that you pointed out that he possibly sent out letters to 100 people, mm-hmm. and he ended up with one person. Right, so that's behind the scenes. That's what we don't realize is what's happening when you're doing any sort of business development activity. You're contacting dozens and dozens of people to get that one person that works out right.
Yeah. And it's So for me, again, I feel very, very fortunate. It was obviously something I didn't deserve. I didn't do anything to earn that, but it's worked out extremely well. So then, like maybe 3 years ago, Kitty retired. So this is, by the way, the same woman who on several occasions was mistaken for my wife. And she said, love that. And I go, really? You think we're proud? And we did have that kind of a relationship that people would, we were very familiar with each other, and it was, we were close friends. And she does look very, very young. But having said that, she was, in any case. So their whole point was, when they were bringing people in, that both of them interviewed. I had to get along with both of them. Again, I didn't know this, and it worked out very, very well.
And so she was, you shared overhead. Mm-hmm. So basically, the office. So I'm just trying to get an idea. We'll get the idea of this deal here. Basically, you came into this architect that had an established practice. He had the office already set up. He had all the forms. He was running a great business. So you were able to fly underneath his wing. Mm-hmm. Kitty, who probably did everything from answering the phone to keeping the books to, probably maybe even drawing some. Did she ever get in a drawing?
Initial client meetings too. So instead of me going out for that initial consultation, because they really want to bend the ear of the architect, she would go out, and that saves an enormous amount of time. And she was good at that, which is a real talent, and it's not something you can probably learn it, but maybe not everyone can learn that talent. But she would throw out a couple of ideas. She was not an architect. But she'd been in the business for years. She and Bruce had worked together for, I want to say, 20 or so years before I even got involved. Mm. So a lot of experience and super nice woman. And that was easily, you knew that she was super nice within seconds of meeting her. So somehow she got that across. I don't even really know how.
So she's a real people person. She could connect with people, empathize with them. Right. So that was great to have that support network as you're starting your firm. Was there any time, Peter, when you thought, 30%, man, it feels like I'm giving away so much?
Well, you have to understand, I knew nothing about business when I started. And so, like my wife does our checkbooks and that kind of stuff. So really was a very minimal, again, I'm good at the visualizing 3 dimensions, designing, that kind of thing. So it didn't occur to me at that time that was a bad deal, because again, I have this employee, and and I have her essentially full time. We split her, but I didn't need her for more than. So I frankly think I got a great deal. So
Yeah. Excellent. So even to this day, looking back, you still are comfortable with the terms.
Right.
Well, that's perfect for a win-win.
Yeah.
So, and then how long did you keep that relationship in terms
So
of the firm?
So it was 7 years.
Okay.
And then Kitty retired, and Bruce, had a couple of different ideas rumbling around his head, which is normal for him. And so he thought it was probably in my best interest that we don't go forward because he wasn't comfortable signing 3-year leases. So on space, and once Kitty retired, we didn't really need the as much office space as we had. That lease was coming to a close, and so it all came to a head. And I started looking for my own office space and found something that was again perfect for me. So.
Hey, Architect Nation, it is great to have you listening in today. I want to remind you that this episode of Business of Architecture is sponsored by BQE Software, the developers of ArchiOffice. ArchiOffice has been powering architecture firms for over 10 years and helping them to be more productive and profitable, which empowers architects to do what you like to do and what you got in this business for in the first place, create great architecture and spaces. Go check it out at archioffice.com. Now back to our show. Now, and Peter, you do, gorgeous residential work, and I think in next episode we're going to get into some of that and talk about some of the images and some of the tools you use to do that and make that easy. But before we do that, I just wanted to, since we're on the sort of the business development, finding work, marketing, ask you a little bit about, during those 7 years and even up till now, what have you started using that has brought in projects? What have you found to be working in your practice to bring in new work? And not just new work, but work that you like.
Right. So the first thing that I did, and I still do, is the home show. So a lot of architects sort of think of the home show as something beneath them, really, and really, I thought that too.
So this is in a convention center. It's a local home and garden show where contractors will have their wares, any home furnishings. And you would have, as an architect, any professional can go in there. Anyone basically can go in there and rent a booth. Is that right?
That's exactly correct. So when I did it, it comes at the end of February this year. So I'm gearing up for it again. But I said this last year, and I'm saying it again this year. I think this is going to be the last year, and I'll get into why that is. But the first thing you have to do for your booth is you have to differentiate yourself from contractors because there's going to be 15 as a minimum contractors, and in all the 10 years I've done it, I've only ever been the only architect. So, but people come into my booth and they think that I'm a contractor, and so I have to visually differentiate my booth from any contractor's booth and make it look sort of architect-y. Can I use that? Is that a word?
It is.
Yeah. Okay. Good. For now, we'll claim it's a word.
Yep.
And so that's like the first step, and then the second step is how you actually look. So what I wear is actually important. I underdressed at times. I wore jeans, to blend in with the crowd, but that makes you look more like a contractor. And so which isn't bad, by the way. Being mistaken for a contractor is a compliment, right? But it's also the wrong image, right? So if I were mistaken for Brad Pitt, that would be a compliment, but still the wrong image, So, so same thing, and so I landed on sort of a professory kind of outfit that I would wear. I'm wearing jeans right now. I don't particularly feel the need to dress up. But for that show, I dress up a little, but you can't be so dressed up that you appear standoffish.
Yeah, so what tuned you into the fact that people were perceiving you differently based upon how you dressed?
Kitty. So so people would come up to her. So the first thing I did was try to dress up like an architect, like wear all black or something like that, and which I by the way really like. So I have plenty of those kinds of outfits, and they would come up to her, and then she would introduce them to me, but nobody came up to me. And so I said, okay. And then she said, well, you kind of look, like you're smarter than they are, or you're dressing that way. and so dress down a little. So then I would do the jeans, right? And that didn't work either, because then it was like, well, when you got out in the field, and da da da. I was like, well, it's not what you think, and we would go on, and it would confuse them, and you don't want confusion. That's never a good thing. And so, I landed on this sort of, and it works. And so, Kitty would knit. She would sit there and she'd knit, and people would come up to her, like they would interrupt her knitting, but they'd have a couple of questions, and she would say, okay, I'll put this down, and it was very, I almost half want to learn how to knit just to, so people would come up to me, and that's a big part of the booth. The booth design is also really important to get, we always did a 10 by 20 booth, and half of the booth was a place to sit down, talk about their projects, because the conversation is going to be 15 minutes, and then, the other half of the booth is just images, of my work. So people would sort of, almost like a museum, kind of come in, and they had to feel that they could come in without being accosted, which at a home show, they're going to be accosted, right? Like every booth needs their business, and they understand that as so I was trying to do the opposite. And, again, like several of my best clients came from the home show, and several of my largest commissions came from the home show as well. But you have to be cognizant of the downside of a home show. The first is it's exhausting. I come home, I'm completely wiped out, and my wife used to make fun of me. She'd go, let me see, what, you sat around and talked all day. So,
well, that's interesting, Peter. Is that because you're an introvert?
No, I think it's because you have to be on, right? So you're on, and it's for 10 hours. Mm-hmm. And so I'd come home and I would just be completely, I just go right to bed, did that, and then get up and do it again the next day. And I'm kind of an odd mix of introvert and extrovert, so I'm fine to be with people for long extended periods of time, but then when I've had enough, I can't do anymore. Mm-hmm. And so that's and it just turns completely off. And so sometimes we'll be at a party and my wife will look around, where did he go? And she'll know, I'm like, I don't know, 15 minutes or whatever. I just need to decompress. So in any case, so the home show is exhausting, way harder than you think it's going to be. Setting up the home show is hard. Finding, the right design is critical and difficult. And you have to be willing to do smaller projects. So people are going to come in with basements. They're going to come in with everything. One-room additions and that kind of stuff. And I didn't say yes to everyone who came through, and I didn't try to, but you have to kind of be willing that's a possibility. And, for me, you have to also understand the good about that. So small projects, again, architects don't typically say, oh, what I really need is, 20 more really small projects. But then you get 20 customers that are wildly happy with what you've done, and then now they're chirping. And so it's building the network. So I've worked on many some years 25, 30 projects per year, and now you got 25, 30 people chirping in a positive way. So that's it's one of the benefits, but it's frenetic, so 25 clients in a year is 25 people who believe that their project is the single most important project on the planet. And they're right, to them for sure. And I have to be able to bring that same level of interest to the project. Otherwise, they're going to know it. And so, so for me, and it's frenetic. Contractors are calling with questions for not one or two projects, but 10 or 20 are under construction. So just keeping that straight in my mind. So now I still do small projects, but I'm much more selective about them. And it's not because of the people. It's because of me. I can only do so much. I can only handle so many projects and be, as my best for that number. So I limit them.
Yeah. Well, just on a side note, I do have a picture of your home show booth here, so we'll go ahead and put that on the episode so people can see the picture.
Okay, good.
Of what it looks like. And how much, in terms of how many days, how much time, and how much money investment does it take to put up a booth like this?
Okay, that's a good question. So So you need a way to display the artwork. I chose these metal grids that were in stores because, again, I thought they had a very interesting open feel, and they were relatively inexpensive. Carpeting I think, is a key because people, they're walking for miles in this thing. They're going to be tired by the time they get to your booth. And carpet padding, I can't tell you how many people walk into my booth and just smile just because of the carpet padding, and they feel it. A place to sit down, so you need a table, chairs. I also have a computer, a little rice bowl Mac that I set up that just had rolling photos, again, just to grab people's attention. Lighting's key. I don't know the exact numbers because it was 10 years ago. I've not changed any of it. So the initial investment was relatively high, but if you amortize the investment over the 10 years, it's almost nothing. Yeah. So the booths at the Timonium Home Show, the one that I actually do, I think it's about $2,700. So that's not inexpensive. Having said that, one person signs up and it pays for itself. Yep. So, and it's funny because everyone else is going after the maximum number of people signing up. I'm going after a very different, I'm going after a couple of people to sign up for large projects. And it's happened, So again, I can think of off the top of my head, probably half a dozen projects that were, commissions or projects that were, $500,000 or more. So construction costs. So these are not small projects. I did a net zero house that came from the home show. And, so it was a whole house out of the ground, that paid for every home show I'll ever do, that commission. But I also have done, I did a project that Marvin Windows used in their ads, their national ads, and so that came from the home show. So again, it's not. There are basements and one-room additions and that kind of stuff, but I get to choose what I want to do. Not at the beginning I was doing whatever came in, but now it was I'm very selective actually.
And what other ways have you found to be successful in terms of bringing in new business?
Okay, so there's really two ways. The first one is I do a monthly email marketing campaign, which if you send that out, that's what you call it. But if you get that, it's called spam, right? So that's the thing. And but what I like about my email marketing campaign is it's called One from Twhoy. A friend of mine who owns Blue Ocean Ideas, his name's Brody Bond, came up with this idea. He's the one who developed my second website, but my first real website. And he liked the name Twhoy Architects, and he wanted me to get out there a little bit more than I was. And so, One from Twhoy was his little tagline. And it's one photo with one caption once a month. And what I've found is that that's enough for me to be sort of top of mind, or maybe not top of mind, but in the consciousness of people. So now I've got somewhere around 550, 600 maybe people I send this out to every single month, and they look forward to it. So my spam looks forward to. And in fact, a couple of months ago, because of a technical glitch, I was at least 2 weeks late. And I got phone calls. Where's my email? And so they know that it's the first week I'm going to send it out. It's usually the first Tuesday or something like that. So anyway, so it's a good to be on people's mind, right?
Yeah.
And so at the same time, I get an email from like Staples or something every single day, and it's just too much.
Yeah.
And, so I had to be very careful about what was too much and what was not enough. And Brody wanted me to do it every 2 weeks, and that's probably better from a marketing standpoint, but I have to do it, So it takes away from what the other things I would be doing, and I wasn't sure that I would want to get every 2 weeks, so I settled on once a month. I'm not sure that's exactly the right number, but it's worked well for me. And then,
in what ways has it worked well, Peter?
Well, again, people forward this email to other people. And, again, like my email marketers, whatever. I mean, they go to parties all the time, and then somebody says, "Oh, we're thinking about a da 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 da," and then we talk to Peter, and they've gotten this email now for 2 years, every single month for 2 years, and it comes right to them, and so they become my agents, really, and has happened more than once. It happens all the time. So that's been a benefit to me. And again, my clients get them, and they see their photograph, and wow, look in it. So it engenders goodwill. It's just a win all the way around. So I really like it. And then the second thing I've done for marketing is actually quite funny. It involves you, Enoch. But when I started 10 years ago, nobody over the age of 30, I thought, was actually using the internet to find an architect. Because, again, 10 years ago was a long time ago, as far as the internet goes. So I didn't put much stock into my own website back then. And after maybe a year or two, I made one just with a Mac website. And it was simple, and it was not overly elegant. It wasn't representing Twhoy architects very, very well at all. And then somebody told me in a meeting that I looked up your stuff on the website, and I said, "Wow, that people actually do that." I didn't believe it at that time, and that now I can't even imagine. I mean, everybody finds me through the website, and so you can look up TwohyArchitects.com, and I, Enoch, your company, working with you and Eric and Richard. And then the person who helped me was Hope on the website. All phenomenal job. And now the website has what you guys call the monkey's fist. And for people who don't know what that is, it's a free giveaway. So I'm giving away how to hire an architect, a pamphlet, but also how to begin your design project, and also how to hire a contractor. So any one of those three, and the only thing you have to pay me is not money, it's an email address. And so those people will be, they first get a couple of emails talking about, hey, are you starting a project? And you call, that kind of stuff. And that goes on for maybe 2 months or maybe 3 months. And then after that, they'll get right into the one from Twhoy, so once a month after that. So it's going to make that one from Twhoy reach even further. So I'm excited. I'm really excited. The website's been live for about 2 weeks, and I've sent out maybe not one of those a day, but it's been almost that. So it's been, so.
I mean, that's incredible.
Right.
Really is.
Yeah,
so that website that Peter's referencing, my company, which I have two partners. Anyways, it's Architects Marketing, architects with an S. So it's not Business of Architecture, but it's architectsmarketing.com. And maybe, Peter, since you're involved in that program, you want to tell our listeners a little bit about the program itself, about what you've learned in there. We have free resources as well as paid resources on that site. What's been your experience being part of this marketing program that I've put together with Eric Bobrow and Richard Petrie?
Well, it's more than the website. For me, it's a resource on how to talk to people. So again, I'm really looking forward to a trip to Vegas, where I'm going to sit down and meet Richard for the first time, but he's already given me advice on how to overcome objections when somebody says, X, you can turn that around, and it's that's nothing that ever came up in architecture school. So it's the way that people think is critical to how they make their decisions, which of course impacts me if they're deciding or not to hire Twhoy architects. So knowing that, but also when you and Richard and Eric talk, I always have to put that through the lens of sort of Twhoy architects. So I don't want to be, and I don't really, again, I have plenty of work, which is great. That's a luxury. I understand that. But I don't want to be too markety, so I'm trying to be just enough marketing without being too much. But again, if I had employees, then I would probably have a very different, feel, because I have, again, their families, their spouses, their children, their college education, the kids or whatever. So I wouldn't, be able to be quite as cavalier as I am. And I would probably be much more focused on, again, the marketing with the capital M, let's just say. So my focus now is to be, marketing in the way that sort of that is comfortable for me, which isn't necessarily good marketing. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it just sounds like you understand what works, and you're going to take it as far as you need to, and not further. Obviously, it could be taken pretty far.
Right. And I would say one more thing is that I now understand a lot more about how that works. I don't know anywhere near as much as you do, but I'm learning. And, and again, before we met, I knew a little, Brody helped with the one from Twhoy, and Eric helped with that too. So we had a conversation that gave me the idea that would be possible, when Eric and I spoke. And then Brody and I had lunch less than a month later, maybe 2 weeks later, and he came up with the idea without me having to say anything. But I was preconditioned, by Eric to think that idea was good before he even said it. And again, I'm smart enough to realize a good idea when it hits me right in the face. So that's at least a good thing.
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Peter. I know it surely has been a pleasure, having you in the program. And, when you talk about meeting personally, so that's a live event. Listeners probably don't know about that because it's part of the Architects Marketing Academy that we're doing right now. But what we're doing is we're throwing a live event in Vegas. Myself, Eric Bobrow, Richard Petrie's flying up from New Zealand, going to be there. We're going to meet members of our program together and just have a 2-day sit down, hash it out, talk about business challenges, and put our minds together, map out a plan for the future. So that's happening the end of February 23rd and 24th, I think.
Right, and then that's sold out, right?
Yeah, it is. That's sold out, and we have another one that we're doing on the next Friday and Saturday, the 27th and the 28th. So we rented this nice penthouse suite at the top of the Mandalay Bay overlooking the just incredible exuberance of Las Vegas, which is just a crazy city, especially for architecturally speaking. It's just rather ridiculous.
Right, and I would say that in a positive way and a negative way. So in other words, ridiculous is a high compliment. Yes. And ridiculous as maybe not a compliment at all, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, but I'm looking forward to it. So Vegas isn't really my favorite city. I don't gamble. I don't do anything like that. But Vegas is great for people watching, and so I can't wait.
Yep. Well, I can't either, Peter. It's going to be great. Well, thanks for touching. It sounds like we've covered a lot in this particular episode. We talked about a very interesting model about how you got started in your firm. Win-win. For any established architects, it seems like that's great because it takes some of the load off of the plate of a seasoned practitioner like yourself who has extra work to go around. It helps a young, up-and-coming, hungry architect who may lack some of the experience and needs a little roost. So that is just awesome. I would love to hear if any of our listeners end up doing that. If you have any additional questions for Peter about how that works, Peter, how can people reach out to you to get some additional information?
So the website's probably the easiest way to do it. So it's the number 2, letter E, then a hyphen, then the word architects with an S.com. So the S is kind of hopeful. Maybe there will be S in the future, but at the moment it's, just me.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Peter, for joining us on the Business of Architecture. And that's a wrap for another show about the business of architecture. To get more resources about how you, as an architect, can run a rewarding business that is both fun, flexible, and profitable, visit businessafarchitecture.com and click the Join button to claim your free account to Business of Architecture Insider. As a member, you'll have access to free tools and resources to help you get more clients, start a new firm, and much more. You'll also get access to my book, Social Media for Architects, where you'll learn how to use internet tools for fun and for profit. Until next week, this has been The Business of Architecture.
Everybody knows that you just gotta do it anyway.
The views expressed on the show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment except to help you conquer the world. Bump music credit to Ben Folds 5, Do It Anyway.